The document was only 2 pages long. I'd seen longer grocery lists. But those 2 pages, printed on cream-colored legal paper with my parents' signatures at the bottom, contained a single sentence that rearranged every year I thought I understood. My name is Mara. I'm 38 years old, a freelance accountant living in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and until 11 months ago I believed, with the specific, unexamined confidence of someone who has never had reason to doubt, that my family loved me in equal measure to how much I loved them. I was wrong. But not in the way you might expect. Let me start where all the important things in my life seem to start, at my parents' kitchen table. The table is oak, scarred along one edge from a move in 1987 that my father still talks about with more emotion than most actual events in his life. My mother keeps a plastic fruit bowl in the center that has contained the same artificial bananas and grapes for as long as I can remember. The kitchen smells of coffee and something faintly floral, the dish soap she's used since I was in elementary school. I know this room the way I know my own face. Better, maybe, because I've spent more time examining it. I had been coming to that kitchen table for 9 years, not as a daughter dropping by for Sunday dinner, but as the person who kept the household running. After my father's back surgery in 2015, when it became clear that his recovery would be long and their savings would not be sufficient, I stepped in. Not dramatically. Not with a speech or a family meeting. I simply started paying things. The physical therapy copays first, then the utilities when their fixed income proved insufficient, then the property tax that fell due in March of that year with no warning and no plan. I did their taxes. I managed their insurance claims, which required a patience I sometimes had to manufacture. I drove them to appointments on days when I had clients waiting, rescheduled my own work around their needs without, it must be said, being asked to. I did not do this because I was asked. That's the part one keep returning to. Nobody sat me down and said, "Mara, you're the responsible one, Mara, we're counting on you." It happened the way water finds its level, naturally, without discussion, because I was the one who knew how to handle things and needed, in some way I didn't fully understand at the time, to be the one who handled them. My brother Nate is 42. He lives in Phoenix, where he has lived for 11 years, which is approximately how long he has not contributed meaningfully to our parents' lives in any practical sense. Nate is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that, because what I'm about to tell you is not a story about a villain. It's a story about a family that made a set of quiet, incremental decisions over years without ever once telling me what those decisions were. Nate called me every Sunday. He sent our parents gift baskets at Christmas, nice ones, the kind with good cheese and wine and a ribbon that my mother saved in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus. He remembered birthdays. He was warm on the phone and funny at holidays when he came home, which was every other Thanksgiving and every other Christmas, alternating with his wife Becca's family in Scottsdale. I don't tell you this to make him sound inadequate. I tell you this to give you the full picture, because the full picture is what I didn't have for 9 years. The document I found was not hidden. That's the first thing I couldn't make sense of afterward. It was in the filing cabinet in my father's study, the second drawer, behind the insurance folders, in a manila envelope labeled estate in my mother's handwriting. I found it because I was looking for their homeowner's insurance renewal, which I needed in order to call and dispute a rate increase on their behalf. I pulled the envelope out, opened it, and read 2 pages that told me my parents had updated their will 14 months prior to leave the house I had been partially funding for 9 years, the house I had driven to twice a week for 9 years, the house I had spent approximately $40,000 of my own money maintaining and supporting, to Nate. Entirely to Nate. Along with the contents, the car, and the remaining savings account. My name appeared once. In a sentence that read, "To our daughter Mara, we leave our gratitude and our love, which she has always had in full." I stood in my father's study with the document in my hands and felt nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then something settled in my chest, not pain, not yet, but the specific weight of a sentence that you know, the moment you read it, will change the shape of everything that came before it. I put the document back. I found the insurance folder. I drove home. That night I did not sleep. The thing about being the responsible one in a family is that you stop being seen as a person and start being seen as a function. I understood this intellectually long before I understood it personally. I'd read enough psychology in my spare time, talked to enough friends about family dynamics, to recognize the pattern from the outside. From the inside, it felt like love. That's the trick of it. When your parents call you first, when they trust you with the hard things, when you are the one consulted and relied upon and thanked, it feels indistinguishable from being cherished. I had been telling myself that story for 9 years. The first sign I ignored, and I can name it precisely now, though I couldn't have then, came in the spring of the year before I found the document. My mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was finishing a client's quarterly report. She wanted to talk through a question about their pension disbursement. Standard. We talked for 40 minutes. At the end of the call, she said something I noted and then filed away under things that don't mean what they sound like. She said, "I just want you to know, Mara, that we see everything you do. We see it." I said thank you. I told her it was nothing, that I was glad to help. Looking back now, I understand what she was doing. She was trying to give me something, acknowledgement, visibility, the verbal equivalent of the thing the will was never going to give me. She was not lying. She did see everything I did. She simply didn't believe that seeing it obligated her to account for it in any formal or financial sense. I called it nothing. It wasn't. The second sign came in August, at a family dinner that Nate attended because he was in town for a college friend's wedding. We ate my mother's pot roast at the oak table with the scarred edge, and Nate told a story about a property he and Becca were thinking of buying in Scottsdale, an investment property, he said, something to diversify. My father leaned forward with an interest I recognized as genuine. They talked about it for 20 minutes. My father asked questions he had never once asked about my work, about the market, the returns, the risks, the timeline. I sat across from them and ate pot roast and told myself I wasn't bothered. I was bothered. Not by the attention to Nate's project. I am not, by nature, competitive with my brother, and I want to be honest about that. What bothered me, in a way I couldn't articulate over pot roast and couldn't fully articulate for months afterward, was the quality of my father's interest. He leaned forward for Nate. He sat back for me. When I mentioned, briefly, a new corporate client that had significantly increased my income for the quarter, my father said, "That's wonderful, honey," and passed the bread. I didn't push. That's my flaw in action, not conflict avoidance exactly, but something adjacent to it. The need to be needed had also made me incapable of insisting on being valued. I had confused the two so completely that I didn't know how to want one without the other. That fall, something in me began paying attention in a new way. Not suspicion, I wasn't there yet. More like the awareness that a room you've been in for years has a door you've never looked at directly. I started noticing small things. The way my parents deferred Nate's opinion on the house renovation they were considering, even though I was the one who had sourced the contractor. The way my mother mentioned, twice in 1 month, that Nate had been asking about the house, not asking about their health, but asking about the house itself, its value, whether they'd had it appraised recently. I didn't connect these things into a picture. I collected them the way you collect pieces of something without knowing what you're assembling. My best friend since college, Diane, knew my family almost as well as I did. She'd been at holiday dinners, had helped me move furniture into my parents' house when they rearranged the bedroom for my father's recovery equipment, had listened to 9 years of Tuesday calls and insurance disputes and property tax crises. In November, over wine at her kitchen table, a table I'd sat at almost as many hours as my parents, I mentioned the pot roast dinner. The leaning forward. Diane listened. She poured more wine. She said, "Does Nate know how much you've put in?" "He knows I help," I said. "That's not what I asked," she said. I didn't push further. Diane had a way of asking questions she already knew the answers to, and I had a way of not wanting to arrive at those answers. We changed the subject. She let me. I think about that conversation now with a particular kind of tiredness. Because Diane knew. Not everything, not the will, not the document, but enough. She had said something at a dinner 2 years earlier, a throwaway comment I dismissed: "Your parents take a lot, Mara. I just wonder if they know that." I had defended them immediately. Explained the circumstances. Made the case, as I had made it to myself 100 times, that what I gave was given freely and didn't require reciprocation. She had nodded and let it go. She was letting me have the version of the story I needed. I understand that now. What I didn't understand then was the cost of her kindness. Through December and into the new year, the tightness in my chest, the one that had settled there the night I found the document, became something I managed rather than examined. I slept poorly. I woke at 3 a.m. with the cream-colored pages behind my eyes, that single sentence about gratitude and love that had no dollar amount attached to it. I went to my parents' house twice a week as I always had. I paid the January gas bill, which had spiked due to the cold snap. I fielded a call from their Medicare supplement provider that took 90 minutes to resolve. I smiled at my mother over coffee. I talked to my father about the renovation contractor's timeline. I said nothing. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I said anything. That's what I told myself. The truth was more complicated. I was terrified that if I spoke too soon, I would discover something worse than what I already knew. And some part of me, the part that had spent 9 years needing to be needed, was not yet ready to stop being the person who held everything together long enough to ask why no one was holding anything together for me. January turned into February, which in Cedar Falls means gray skies and the particular silence of a town that is waiting for something warmer. I drove to my parents' house on Tuesdays and Thursdays as always. I made coffee. I handled things. On the outside I was exactly who I had always been. On the inside I was building a case. I am an accountant. I understand numbers and patterns and the stories that financial records tell when you know how to read them. So I began, quietly, to read. Not their private accounts, I had access to those already, as I had always managed their finances, but the history. 9 years of it. I went back through bank statements, through the records I'd kept of my own contributions, through receipts I'd filed in my own system because I am meticulous by profession and had been meticulous about this without ever asking myself why I was keeping such careful records of gifts freely given. The number I arrived at was $43,280. That was the direct financial contribution, the tax payments, the medical bills above their coverage, the contractor deposit for the bathroom renovation, the new water heater in 2019. It did not include the value of my time, which I calculated separately and chose not to write down, because the number was large enough to be upsetting and I was trying, in that February, to stay functional. I sat with $43,280 and the sentence about gratitude and love, and felt something harden in me that had previously been soft. Then I made a mistake. I called Nate. I didn't call him about the will. I wasn't ready for that, not with him, not yet. I called him under the pretense of coordinating their anniversary dinner in March, which I had been organizing because I organized everything. We talked for 20 minutes about logistics. Then, carefully, I said, "Do you know much about their estate planning? I was just thinking, with Dad's health being what it is, it might be worth everyone being on the same page." There was a pause. Not a long pause. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But I had spent 9 years listening to the specific textures of pauses in my family's conversations, and this one had something in it, a density, a weight, that I felt in my sternum before I could name it. "I think they've got it handled," Nate said. His voice was easy. Nate always sounded easy. "You know how organized Mom is." "Right," I said. "You worry too much," he said. "You always have." He laughed. It was warm. It was genuine. And it told me absolutely nothing except that he either didn't know or knew and wasn't going to tell me, and I had no way yet of knowing which. That night I thought about what it would mean if Nate knew. The will had been updated 14 months ago. He had been home for Thanksgiving 13 months ago. I tried to remember that Thanksgiving, tried to remember if there had been anything, any conversation that went quiet when I entered a room, any look exchanged over the turkey that I hadn't understood at the time. I couldn't find anything concrete. But I found a feeling, the memory of sitting at the table that Thanksgiving and noticing that my mother kept touching Nate's arm. Just touching it, while he talked, while he laughed, the way you touch someone you are relieved to have near you. I had noticed it and felt something I dismissed immediately as unworthy of me. Jealousy, I'd thought. Don't be small. I wasn't jealous. I was reading something real that I refused to read. In the third week of February, I went to see Diane. I hadn't told her about the document, hadn't told anyone. But I needed to be in a room with someone who knew my family, who could help me think, who I trusted completely. We sat in her kitchen. She made tea. I told her I was worried about my parents' estate planning, that I wasn't sure everything was in order, that I was thinking of asking them about it directly. Diane wrapped her hands around her mug. She looked at me. "Mara," she said. And stopped. "What?" She looked down at the mug. "I think that's a good idea," she said. "I think you should ask them directly." It was what she didn't say that I should have heard. She hadn't said "I'm sure it's fine." She hadn't said "you're probably worrying for nothing." She had said, "Ask them directly." As if she knew that asking them directly was the thing that needed to happen, and that the reason it needed to happen was not because everything was fine. I went home and lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and understood, at approximately 2 in the morning, that Diane knew something. I didn't call her back that night. I told myself I needed to be sure first, needed to think it through, needed to approach this correctly. The truth was simpler and less flattering. I was afraid. Not of my parents, not of Nate, but of the specific shape the truth would take once I stopped managing the distance between myself and it. I had kept that distance for months. It had become a habit. Habits, even destructive ones, have a comfort to them. The food on my kitchen counter sat untouched 2 evenings that week. I'd cooked and then couldn't eat, found myself standing over plates of pasta I'd made on autopilot while my mind circled the same set of facts. My hands wouldn't stay still at my desk. I started tasks and abandoned them. A client noticed, asked if I was feeling well, said I seemed distracted. I told her I was fighting a cold. I wasn't fighting a cold. I was fighting the knowledge that the family I had organized my adult life around had organized theirs without me. March arrived and with it my parents' anniversary dinner, 42 years, which my mother referred to as 42 years of stubbornness on both sides, which was the most honest thing she said about their marriage regularly. I had booked the restaurant, organized the reservation, arranged for Nate and Becca to join via video call because they couldn't make the trip. I sat across from my parents at a table with a white cloth and a candle and watched them the way I had been watching them for 2 months, carefully, from a slight remove, looking for the thing I wasn't supposed to know. My father ordered the salmon. My mother had the chicken. We talked about the winter, about the neighbor's dog, about a documentary they'd seen. Ordinary. Warm. The specific warmth of people who love each other and also love you, which is not the same as being fair to you, which is a distinction I was only beginning to understand. When Nate's face appeared on my mother's iPad, propped against the bread basket, something happened to her face that I watched happen. She brightened. Not in the way she brightened for me, she was always pleased to see me, I don't doubt that, but in a particular, relieved way, as if something that had been slightly held had released. She reached toward the screen the way she'd touched his arm at Thanksgiving. She told me, much later, what she had been feeling in those months, after everything came out and we had finally arrived at the kind of conversation our family had spent 4 decades avoiding. "I knew it wasn't right," she said. "Every time I saw you I knew. You'd walk in with the folders, with the paperwork, always so prepared, always so capable, and I'd think, she deserves better than what we've given her on paper. But your father had such strong feelings about Nate, about what Nate needed, and I told myself, I keep telling myself, that love doesn't have to be equal to be real." She stopped. She looked at her hands. "I think I told myself that because it was easier than telling your father he was wrong." After the anniversary dinner, I went home and opened my laptop and did what I had been avoiding doing for 2 months. I looked up the property records for my parents' house. Public record. The house was valued at $312,000. The savings account I managed held, as of the last statement I'd processed, $67,379,000, plus the car, plus the contents of a house I had partially funded for 9 years. And a sentence about gratitude and love. I sat at my desk until midnight. Then I opened a new document and began writing down everything I knew, everything I had contributed, every date and amount and phone call and appointment. Not because I had decided what to do with it. Because I am an accountant, and when something doesn't balance, the first thing you do is document the discrepancy. The following week I called the family attorney's office, not as myself, but as a prospective client, with a general question about whether a beneficiary needed to be notified when a will was updated. The answer was no. A will could be changed at any time, by any competent adult, without informing anyone. The previous beneficiary had no legal claim on the new document simply because they had been named in an older one. I thanked the receptionist and hung up and sat with the specific silence of a question that has been answered in the worst possible way. Then I called Diane. "I need to know," I said, when she picked up, "what you know." A pause. Longer than Nate's pause in January. Different in texture, not calculating, but weighted with something that felt like relief and dread in equal measure. "How much do you know?" she said. "Enough," I said. "The will." She exhaled. A long, slow breath that told me everything before she said a word. "Nate told Becca," she said. "Becca told me." She said she thought I should know in case you needed support. "That was 8 months ago." She stopped. "Mara, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I kept thinking you'd find out, or it would change, or—" "8 months," I said. "I know. You sat in your kitchen in February and told me to ask them directly." "Yes." "Because you already knew." "Yes." I don't know what I felt in that moment exactly. The word betrayal is too simple for it. Diane had been sitting with this for 8 months. She had made tea and asked careful questions and let me find my own way to the door she already knew was there. She hadn't lied to me. She had simply not told me the truth, which is a distinction that feels meaningful when you're on the comfortable side of it and feels like nothing at all when you're not. "Why?" I said. "Because you would have been devastated," she said. "And I didn't know how to be the one who did that to you." I understood it. That's the hardest part. I understood it completely, because I had spent 9 years doing exactly the same thing to myself. I didn't know it then, but I was beginning to understand something that would take months to fully articulate, that the people who love us can still choose themselves at the moment it matters most. That silence, in those circumstances, is not neutral. It costs the person being protected something they didn't agree to give. I told Diane I needed time. She said she understood. I believed her, and also believed that understanding and being forgiven for something are not the same thing, and that I didn't know yet which one she was going to get. That night I made a decision. I was going to talk to my parents. Not with the document, not with the spreadsheet, not with the 43,000 and the property record and the attorney's answer. I was going to sit at the oak table with the scarred edge and the plastic fruit bowl and ask them, directly, what they planned. I was going to give them the chance to tell me the truth themselves. He spoke for a long time. My mother added things, corrected things, went quiet. This is what he told me, in the voice of a man who had been carrying something that had grown heavier than he'd expected. It started before the surgery. Before any of this. Nate called me, this was 2014, before your mother and I had updated anything, and he was in trouble. Real trouble. A business deal that had gone wrong, money he owed that he couldn't pay, Becca threatening to leave. He called me at 11 at night and he wasn't himself. I hadn't heard him like that since he was 19 and failed his first year of college. I was scared for him. We sent him money. Not a lot. Enough. And I told him, I said, Nate, when the time comes, we're going to make sure you're taken care of. I don't know why I said it. I think I was afraid of losing him. He'd been so far away for so long, and that phone call, it was the most real conversation we'd had in years. I made him a promise. Your mother didn't know I'd said it at first. I told her later and she worried. We both worried. Because we knew what you'd been doing. We knew the numbers, Mara. We kept records too. You think we didn't see it? Every time you paid something we wrote it down. There's a notebook in the filing cabinet, your mother's handwriting, every date, every amount. But I'd made Nate a promise. And I know this isn't an excuse, I know how it sounds, I am the kind of man who keeps his promises. Even the ones he shouldn't have made. We told ourselves you were strong. We told ourselves you didn't need it. We told ourselves that what you gave freely, and that turning it into a transaction would cheapen it somehow. I know how that sounds now. Sitting here I hear exactly how it sounds. But at the time it felt like we were protecting something. Protecting the purity of what you'd done for us. I think what I was actually protecting was myself. From having to tell you. From having to explain to my daughter that I made her brother a promise in a weak moment on a phone call at 11 at night, and I didn't have the courage to tell her for 9 years. I'm sorry, Mara. I have been sorry since the morning after I signed that document. I am sorry in a way that I know it doesn't fix anything. But I need you to know it's been with me every day. He stopped. He was looking at his hands. My mother was crying, quietly, the way she cries, not dramatically, just the slow tracking of tears she doesn't wipe away. I sat with everything my father had said. I arranged it the way I arrange numbers, into columns, into relationships, into the shape of what it added up to. It added up to this: my parents loved me. They had also, for 9 years, used that love as a reason not to be fair to me. They had watched me give and told themselves my giving didn't require accounting. They had made a promise to my brother in a frightened moment and honored it over 9 years of evidence that a different decision was warranted. And my father was sorry. Genuinely, completely sorry, in a way that changed nothing about what the document said. I believe you, I said. They both looked at me. I believe you're sorry, I said. I believe you kept records. I believe Nate was in trouble and you were scared and you made a promise that felt necessary at the time. I looked at my father. And I need you to understand that none of that changes what this cost me. Not the money. The years of believing I was valued in a way that the most formal document in your lives contradicts. My mother reached across the table for my hand. I let her take it. I didn't pull away. I love you, I said. Both of you. That isn't in question. But I need time. And I need you to think, seriously think, about whether what's on that document is what you actually mean. I drove home in the gray March light, and somewhere on the highway between their street and mine I started to cry. Not from pain exactly, or not only from pain. From the particular exhaustion of having carried something very heavy for a very long time, and having finally been allowed to set it down. The weeks that followed were not clean or simple, which is how I know they were real. My parents called 3 days after the Thursday conversation. My mother did the talking, which was unusual. My father was the one who made the big statements, and my mother was the one who made sure they landed correctly. She said they had spoken with their attorney. She said they were amending the will. She said they wanted to split everything equally, and they wanted to add a formal acknowledgement. The attorney had suggested a letter of intent, not legally binding, but documented, of my financial contributions over the prior 9 years. I said I needed to think about it. That surprised her. I could hear it in the pause. Of course, she said. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to my own attorney, which was a conversation that was useful not because it changed the legal picture but because it clarified what I actually wanted. I didn't want the money, or rather, I didn't want it in the way you want something you've been denied. I wanted to be seen. I wanted the document to reflect the reality of what had happened, not because I needed the inheritance to survive, but because a family's most formal act of accounting should not lie about who showed up. I agreed to the amendment. But I told my mother something else, in the same call, that I had not planned to say and which came out of me with the simplicity of something long overdue. I'm going to keep coming on Thursdays, I said. I love you and I'm not abandoning you. But I'm going to stop managing things I don't need to manage. You have the means to hire someone for the insurance calls and the contractor coordination. I'll help when it's genuine help, when you need me specifically, as your daughter. But I've been filling a role that isn't mine, and I think we've all been more comfortable with that than we should have been. My mother was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said, finally. You're right. It was the simplest conversation we'd had in 9 years. With Diane it was harder and took longer. She came to my apartment 2 weeks after the Thursday, with wine and the specific posture of someone who has accepted that they did something wrong and is not going to try to argue their way out of it. We sat on my couch and she said, directly and without preamble, I should have told you. I told myself I was protecting you. I was protecting myself from a hard conversation. That's the truth. I appreciated the precision of it. It's easier to forgive honesty about a mistake than an explanation of it. We didn't go back to exactly what we'd been. Something had shifted, not broken, but rearranged. I think that's realistic. You don't leave 8 months of silence entirely behind you. But you can decide that what exists after is still worth tending. With Nate it was different again, and in some ways the most complicated. He called me a week after my parents told him about the amendment. His tone was careful, which was unusual for him. Mom and Dad talked to me, he said. I know, I said. I didn't know you knew, he said. About the will. I thought, he stopped. I should have called you. When they first told me, I should have called and told you myself. I didn't because I told myself it wasn't my place, that it was their decision. But that was cowardly. Yes, I said. It was. Another pause. I'm sorry, Mara. I believed him. Not completely, not immediately, but enough. Nate hadn't designed what happened. He had been handed something in a hard moment and accepted it without examining what accepting it said about what was fair. That is a failure of imagination, not of character. The distinction matters, though it doesn't erase the cost. Tell me about the debt, I said. The real situation. He told me. It was bad, not catastrophic, but genuinely difficult, the kind of financial tangle that happens to people who make several average decisions in a row during an expensive period. Nate and Becca were managing it, but barely. He'd been too proud to ask for help directly. I didn't offer to fix it. That was new, and it required a deliberateness I felt in my whole body. Instead I said, if you want to talk through options, I'm a good accountant. I can help you look at the numbers. But I'm doing it as your sister, not as the family solution. He said, that's fair. It was fair. It was the most fair thing I'd said in our relationship in a decade. The amendment to the will was finalized in May. I wasn't present for the signing, didn't need to be, didn't want to be. My mother texted me a photo of the signed pages, which I found both touching and slightly absurd, and which I saved without quite knowing why. What changed after all of it was not dramatic. I still went to my parents' house, still had coffee at the oak table, still talked to my father about the renovation that was finally, after 2 years, moving forward. But I went as myself, as their daughter, which is a different thing than being their manager, their coordinator, their solution. I started taking on fewer clients in the evenings. I started calling Diane on Saturdays instead of when I needed to process something. I started, slowly and with some difficulty, learning the difference between being useful and being present, and understanding that I had spent 9 years offering the first as a substitute for the second, because the first felt safer. The notebook my mother had mentioned, the one in the filing cabinet, her handwriting, every date and every amount, I asked to see it, eventually. She brought it to a Thursday visit in June, set it on the table between us. I opened it. 43 pages, 9 years of entries. Every grocery run I'd made when my father was in recovery. Every insurance call dated and noted. Every check. All of it in her careful cursive, which is the same handwriting she'd used on birthday cards my whole childhood. I looked at it for a long time. Then I closed it and handed it back to her. "You don't want to keep it?" she said. "No," I said. "I believe you." That was enough. More than enough, actually. It was the thing I'd needed without knowing how to name it, not money, not a revised document, but evidence that what I had given had been witnessed. That it had mattered to someone besides me. The door to what we'd been, the version of our family where I managed everything and asked for nothing, closed somewhere in those months. Not dramatically. Not with a speech or a confrontation at the airport or a letter I'd been drafting in my head. It closed the way things close when you stop walking through them. Quietly, without announcement, in a Tuesday or a Thursday that looked like any other. My parents came to me now, when they needed things, the way you come to someone you respect rather than someone you rely on. It felt different. It felt, in some ways I was still getting used to, like the version of the relationship I should have had for a long time. I don't know if that's resolution. I know it's real. The most painful thing in this story is not the will. It's the notebook. The fact that Dolores kept a record, 43 pages of dates and amounts, 9 years of careful documentation, tells you everything about the gap between knowing and acting. She saw. She counted. She wrote it all down. And then she signed a document that made none of it matter in the only formal language families have for saying what they meant. That gap, between awareness and accountability, is what this story is really about. Mara spent 9 years in a dynamic that is easy to misread as love, because it contained real love. Her parents genuinely cherished her. Her contribution was genuinely seen and recorded and appreciated. But appreciation and equity are not synonyms, and the family had quietly agreed, without anyone ever saying it aloud, to treat them as if they were. That agreement was never challenged because Mara's deepest flaw, her need to be needed, made her complicit in it. She wasn't deceived in the simple sense. She was comfortable. The role of family-capable one had given her identity, purpose, a specific form of closeness that felt like being chosen. She had confused being indispensable with being loved, and the confusion had served everyone so well that nobody had reason to examine it. Frank's decision was not calculated cruelty. That's worth sitting with. A frightened father made a promise on a late-night phone call to a son who seemed to be falling apart, and then spent 9 years honoring that promise because he was the kind of man who kept his promises, even the ones he shouldn't have made, even when the evidence of what they cost accumulated in his wife's careful handwriting. His psychology is recognizable because it is ordinary. The failure was not of love but of courage, the courage to revise a decision when you understand its full cost, to tell the truth to the person most affected by your silence. What Frank and Dolores did, and what Diane did, in her own smaller register, was make decisions about Mara's life without including her in them. This is a particular form of disrespect that disguises itself as protection. They told themselves she didn't need to know because she was strong, capable, fine. They used her competence as permission to withhold the truth from her. And Mara, by never asking, by never insisting on being included in the formal, documented version of her own family's future, allowed it to continue. The turn that changed everything was not the confrontation itself. It was the moment Mara sat in her father's study with those 2 pages in her hands and put them back. That decision, to absorb the information and say nothing, to keep functioning as if nothing had shifted, was both her flaw and the beginning of her clarity. She needed to see the full shape of what had happened before she could decide how to respond to it. That is not weakness. It is the way someone who has spent years managing others learns to manage herself, methodically, without panic, with her records in order. The final amendment to the will matters less than what Mara said on the phone to her mother afterward, that she was going to stop filling a role that wasn't hers. That sentence is the real resolution. Not because it solved anything financially, but because it named the dynamic correctly for the first time, not as love, not as family obligation, but as a role. Something she had stepped into, could examine, could choose to step out of. 9 years is a long time to be the person who holds everything together before asking what you're holding it together for. What stays with me about this story is the notebook. 43 pages of evidence that someone saw, really saw, and still chose silence over fairness. And I wonder, how often do the people who love us keep records of what we give while quietly deciding we don't need what they owe us in return? We tell ourselves the capable ones are fine. We tell ourselves that strength doesn't need tending. But Mara wasn't strong because she needed nothing, she was strong because she had learned, somewhere along the way, that needing things was dangerous. That's not capability. That's armor. If there's anything to take from this, it's simpler than it sounds. Being reliable shouldn't cost you your place at the table. And if the people who love you have confused your willingness to give with permission to take, that's worth naming. Even if your voice shakes when you name it.